Welcome to the Now, I'm Ashley.
And I'm Adam.
And out with the old and with the old, I guess. That's been the recent motto of video game publishing anyway, where nostalgia has quickly become one of the driving forces of modern gaming.
From the success of Crash Bandicoot's insane trilogy to the crazy rush for retro consoles, everything new is old again and gamers can't seem to get enough of it. Which is only going to encourage even more remakes and remasters, as if publishers weren't already encouraged enough.
And as can be expected, there are, of course, several opinions about this new wave of nostalgia games, with some claiming that it's good for gaming and others claiming that it's discouraging innovation and experimentation with new titles because everyone is just working on old stuff.
We take a look at both sides of the issue, how we got to this point in the first place, and ask the question, why does nostalgia sell so well for gamers?
We're suckers! Well, video over. So first off, it's important to note that nostalgia marketing is not unique to video games. It's been around for as long as anyone's wanted to harken back to the good old days. And we can see this across just about every medium, from Nokia trying to re-release their old school flip phones to Disney remaking live action versions for their biggest cartoon hits.
Marketing experts say this kind of marketing is all about connecting to simpler times, especially as society becomes more complex and people become increasingly worried about the future.
Professor of Marketing Strategy Gregory Carpenter puts it this way: the past is safe because it is completely predictable. Connecting with the past through familiar, loved brands transports people to another time by evoking the same feelings they experienced so long ago.
You don't have to look very far at all to see that this line of thought has completely permeated the video games we know and love. It's to the point where there are several different categories of video game nostalgia.
And most of that is because, quite simply, nostalgia sells like crazy with gamers. The most recent example of this is Crash Bandicoot. It's the #1 selling game in June despite only being on store shelves for 24 hours-ish. And in the UK, it even beat Splatoon 2 last week for the #1 spot in sales despite having been out for several weeks. That makes it the top PS4 exclusive in terms of having the most consecutive weeks at #1. It's tied with another remaster, The Last of Us.
But back to the categories of remasters. We've got remasters of old games,
Yep.
which are updated and brought in full resolution glory to current generation platforms, titles like The Last of Us and even the original StarCraft. We've also got full-on remakes of games like Final Fantasy VII, which is getting completely reworked from the original, ditching gameplay systems in favor of more modern mechanics.
And then you got stuff that's somewhere in between, which is where something like Crash Bandicoot falls, and the upcoming Shadow of the Colossus for PS4, a game that's already been remastered once, by the way. Both of which aren't just getting a bit of polish, but recreating the original as close as possible with brand new assets. So they feel classic, but also take into account more modern gamer sensibilities.
Of course, nostalgia isn't just limited to revisiting those old titles, but resurrecting them in the form of sequels like the just announced Beyond Good and Evil 2. Sonic Mania is another example, and hell, even Bubsy is getting a brand new sequel.
Well, it's because we all miss Bubsy,
Fucking
right?
Bubsy.
Yeah, Bubsy. And thanks to Nintendo, we've got a whole new wave of nostalgia marketing in games that's coming in the form of classic consoles. They've already pissed off fans by not making enough of the much-hyped NES Classic last year. They seem to be repeating that process again for the SNES Classic. If trademarks are any indication, there's probably a Nintendo 64 Classic next year.
Other companies are starting to take notice of all this nostalgia hawking too. Atari and Sega have already announced their own retro consoles in the works, and as far as software goes, both Sega and Square Enix have told investors that a key component of their future business plans will revolve around remaking old titles and dusting off old IPs after years of storage.
I mean, Sega just did the thing where they also had the mobile, they released all their games on mobile, and
Yeah.
it turns out they just didn't run great, but they were really leaning on that to try to make money off their old games. So where did the boom come from? Well, actually a little bit difficult to pinpoint because it was one of those sort of trickles that turned into an avalanche over several years.
Part of the success of retro games and nostalgia remakes is due to the fact that gaming is in a unique place because as a medium, it almost necessitates these remakes as a way of preserving its own history. As hardware improves, bringing new graphics capabilities and resolutions, it makes sense to reimagine old titles or at the very least update them to be played on modern consoles.
Right, because sometimes a console goes away and then all of those games go away too. They aren't necessarily carried through. Other mediums don't quite work that way. Old movies are pretty easily viewable on any device or on TV, whereas it's not as easy with games. Although even some movies, if they never got brought up to Blu-ray, you're gonna have a difficult time watching them now because who has a VHS player? Not everyone has old consoles lying around either, or a way to easily connect them to modern TV sets without at least one trip to the electronics store. It's a very confusing process, and even then, those games tend to have aged quite a bit.
So you've got gamers with a desire to play all of their favorite old shit, and publishers with a desire to make some money off of it. It's actually really great for publishers because all consoles will be last generation within a few years, then you can repackage it and sell it all over again with every passing generation, play it again in 4K with HDR, etc.
Yeah, 8K, 16K, 32K. You get to resell it and resell it and resell it. And according to researchers, gamers love this because, damn it kind of feels good to just go back to the good old days. Psychological scientist Clay Routledge, who's done quite a bit of research on the effects of gaming and nostalgia, says, I think retro gaming actually has little to do with the specific games one is nostalgic for. Instead, I believe that the games serve as a cue or a reminder of experiences we had in our youth that were truly fulfilling for us. For example, I have very fond memories of playing The Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Bros. On the NES. These are legitimately good and important games in the history of gaming, but I think what makes them so special for me personally is the broader context of playing these games.
Other research shows that the psychological ties between nostalgia and video games are strengthened because nostalgia is at its most potent in the context of social interactions, and for many, that's what gaming is all about.
And interestingly enough, nostalgia seems to be doubly potent for one of the bigger age brackets of the gaming population, millennials. Some studies in recent years have indicated that millennials, for whatever reason, enter a stage of early nostalgia, and that nostalgia marketing is most effective with that age group.
So everything aligns to make gaming poised for this kind of boom, but of course there will be detractors. Some consider this trend to be a way of ripping gamers off, particularly when it comes to remastering last generation titles. If the consoles were backward compatible in the first place, there wouldn't be as much of a need. To be fair, this is more of an issue with PlayStation than it is with Xbox, which has greatly expanded this list of backwards compatible titles over the last year or so.
Which I've also really appreciated.
Yeah?
I played Catherine on the Xbox One for the first time thanks to backwards compatibility.
That's dope.
And there's definitely merit to that thought as well because many companies have learned how to pre-manufacture nostalgia. It's a concept that's been around for a while. It's used very effectively by other giants like Disney. You release something old and then you make way for the new.
Which is most certainly the case with the two biggest nostalgia booms going on right now, Crash Bandicoot and Nintendo. With the case of Crash, there's definitely some hopes to revitalize the brand with a new game, and the remake just gives proof to Activision's hypothesis. People want more Crash, and they were able to find that out with a much cheaper remake rather than a full-fledged generation game.
But, we're gonna get a full-fledged next generation game now, right? Pretty much.
Let's hope.
Likewise, Nintendo's nostalgia is a constant reminder that Nintendo's gaming pedigree is unmatched and will probably ultimately culminate in whatever their plans are for the Switch's virtual console. Industry analyst Atul Goyal says what they're doing is trying to create a lot of buzz for their games and generate nostalgia. That nostalgia is very important to create success for the Switch, so it's all tied together.
So which is it? Were games better in the past? Are companies milking us for every dollar by tugging on our nostalgia boners? That's a weird sentence. Is innovation dead in the industry?
Alright, maybe a little column A, a little column B, a little column C. There are arguments for all sides of the issue, but what it seems to boil down to is that a lot of these games hit gamers in our most formative years. The emotional connections had a very long time to strengthen, and it kind of takes us back to those times that were a little bit simpler, a little bit easier for all of us. I remember, playing video games in the afternoon after school where I didn't have any stupid homework and eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and those were nice times. And that I don't have that for a lot of other games that I've played more recently.
And if it makes us happy to play them and publishers happy to sell them, everybody kinda wins a little bit.
Yeah, everyone wins a little bit. And that's, I guess, the best way to be. It's better than a full win-loss. While innovation is always going to be a concern, though, successful new IPs do still happen in gaming, and at a pretty decent clip, too. Some of the biggest titles of this year have been brand new IPs like Horizon Zero Dawn, Battlegrounds, For Honor, and publishers will take notice of that just like they do the retro gaming trend. So we don't have to rely entirely on old games and nostalgia to sell new stuff. New stuff can still be successful on its own, but nostalgia doesn't hurt.
So nostalgia isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and hopefully its success allows publishers to take risks on new shit as well as old shit.
What do you guys think of gaming's nostalgia boom? Are there too many remakes, remasters, crazy old consoles being released again? Not enough? Let us know in the comments.
For future talk about gaming's most interesting dilemmas, remember to like this video, and if you're new around here, subscribe to the know.
Some claiming that it's good for gaming, others claiming that it's discouraging innovation and experimentation.
Especially as society grows more complex and people are. Especially as. It's to the point where.
Been remastered once, by the way. Both of which, they're not. Well, they're getting a. Damn, I'm gonna need to redo this paragraph, sorry.